The notification chimed at 11:47 p.m. Nia Lives has gone live. Nobody was supposed to see this. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't close the app. The phone slipped from her fingers, hit the bathroom tile, and landed face-up, camera still running, red dot pulsing like a wound. She didn't notice. She was too busy pressing her spine against the cabinet beneath the sink, knees pulled to her chest, trying to make herself smaller than the fear that had swallowed the room whole. 12 hours ago, she had a job. 6 hours ago, she had a plan. 20 minutes ago, Marcus had texted, "I'm coming over. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She hadn't answered. She'd turned off the lights instead, drawn the curtains, told herself if she was quiet enough, still enough, he would assume she wasn't home and leave. That's what she told herself. But the bruise along her collarbone, the one she'd covered with concealer for 3 weeks, the one that had finally faded to yellow, the one she'd started to believe was in the past, told a different story. Her body remembered what her mind kept trying to forget. The camera watched. Viewers trickled in the way they always did. At midnight, insomniacs, overseas fans, people who had nothing better to do than watch a girl try on earrings and talk about her day. 40 viewers became 80. 80 became 200. They came expecting her usual warmth, her laugh, the comfort of someone who made the night feel less lonely. Instead, they found this: a toppled phone, a bathroom ceiling, the sound of breathing that was barely breathing, at all these thin, jagged inhales like someone surfacing from water. And when she finally lurched forward to grab the phone, when her face filled the frame for just 1 second, the comments exploded. "Girl, are you okay? Nia? Wait, is that a bruise on her neck? Someone call." She didn't see any of it. She was staring at the door. The shadow appeared at 11:53 p.m., a dark shape bleeding under the gap, slow and deliberate, the kind of stillness that is its own threat. No knock, no voice. Just presence, heavy on the other side of wood that suddenly felt like paper. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. 2,644 people held their breath with her. 11 floors above the city, inside a private security operations center that smelled of cold coffee and leather, Min Jun Han almost didn't look up. Not the top he saved that for when he needed silence, but high enough that the city looked like a grid of controllable light. He almost missed it. His analyst had pulled the feed as a fluke. One of their AI flags had caught unusual activity on a streamer account linked to a building on their watch list. Standard check. 30-second review. End quote. End quote. He'd been about to wave it off when something snagged in his chest, the way a thread catches on something sharp and won't let go. He'd seen panic attacks before. He'd seen performance, too. Streamers who manufactured drama for retention, who cried on cue and laughed about it in the next video. He knew the difference. Panic looked like forgetting you were being watched. It looked like this: a woman so consumed by fear, she had no idea. 11 floors of distance and 1,000 strangers were witnessing her fall apart. And that shadow, everyone in the comments was crying, "Call the police, call someone. Is she okay?" No one was looking at the shadow the way Min Jun was looking at it. The exact distance from the doorframe, the weight implied by how far it spread, the patience of someone who had done this before. He leaned forward. The stream cut out at 11:59 p.m., static. Then, nothing. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds before Min Jun was already moving. "Pull everything on Nia Lives," he said, reaching for his jacket. Full background. Address, known associates, incident history. He paused at the door, something cold and certain settling in his gut. And, "Get my car." He didn't know her name yet. He already knew he was too late to watch and not act. Chapter 2. The Man Who Doesn't Call the Police. He didn't knock. The door opened. The way doors open when someone has already decided what's on the other side isn't a question. With quiet authority, a key card, and two men who moved like shadows given instructions. Min Junhan stepped into Nia's apartment at 12:04 a.m. and took in the overturned chair, the shattered glass near the kitchen threshold, and the man standing in the hallway who hadn't yet heard him come in. The lock plate on the doorframe had been torn half loose, the chain dangling like an afterthought. Marcus hadn't just come over. He'd let himself in the way men like him always did, as if boundaries were suggestions. Marcus turned slowly the way men turn when they're certain they're still the most dangerous thing in the room. He was wrong. Minjun didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for anything. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, and looked at Marcus with the particular stillness of a man who has already run the calculation and already knows the outcome. When he spoke, it was in the tone of someone closing a meeting, not opening one, closing it, because the discussion had already been had without Marcus's participation. "The building is mine," he said, "which means this floor is mine, which means you have about 40 seconds to make a decision I'd recommend you not take lightly." Marcus laughed the short, hollow laugh of a man who performs bravado when his nerves require it. "You don't know who I know exactly who you are." Minjun tilted his head, almost curious. "Your full name, your sealed, juvenile record, the 3 civil complaints that never went to trial, a pause that had weight in it. That's why I'm giving you 40 seconds instead of 10. The silence that followed was its own language, dense and cold, the kind that communicates what no sentence could. Marcus read it. His jaw worked. He looked at the two men flanking the doorframe like architecture made of intent, looked back at Minjun's face, which offered nothing, not anger, not threat, not posture, just absolute certainty about how this ended, and then he left. No parting word, no ultimatum. The door closed behind him like a period at the end of something no one needed to finish. Nia stood at the edge of the hallway, barefoot, one hand braced against the wall. Her knuckles had gone white against the paint. She had witnessed all of it. "You own this building," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was hoarse, too controlled for someone whose hands were still visibly trembling. The kind of control that costs something. Among others, he didn't move toward her. He kept his distance the way you keep distance from something wounded, not out of indifference, but out of understanding that closeness too fast is its own kind of violence. You need medical attention. There are options available to you right now. A pause, police, hospital, or you come with me and we handle this with the care it deserves. She stared at him. "Handle it." "Yes, you're a stranger." "I'm aware." Something moved at the edge of his expression. Not quite warmth, not yet, but the architecture of it. A suggestion of something that might, under different circumstances, become soft. "The choice is yours. It always will be, if you come with me. That's the only promise I'll make tonight." She looked at the hallway Marcus had disappeared into. She looked at the shattered glass still scattered across the kitchen threshold, glinting under the overhead light. She looked at her own hands and the fact that no act of will could make them stop shaking. Then she bent down and picked up her shoes. The elevator rose without a sound, which Nia found appropriate. She counted floors to keep herself anchored. 22, 30, 38, 42. He lived on 42. And when the doors opened, she stepped into a space that didn't resemble a home so much as a controlled environment, wide and spare, and deliberate in the way of rooms that have been designed not for living, but for thinking. It hit her then, this wasn't a second location, not a new address on a map. The penthouse was simply the top of the same building she'd been trapped in, the same structure, recontextualized into a different kind of power. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. The city had been reduced below them to something gorgeous and distant, all light and no noise, no throw pillows, no framed photographs. No softness offered to the eye except the low amber glow of lamps that had been calibrated. She was certain someone had calibrated them for maximum calm and minimum intimacy. There were cameras. She counted 4 in the main room without trying, and stopped counting because the number would only make her feel worse. Guest room, Minjun said, and a woman appeared from a corridor, early 40s, composed with the efficient and unhurried manner of someone who has been called at midnight before and has long since made peace with it. Dr. Lena Park. She'll assess your injuries and stay as long as you need her. A physician, clinical, quiet, hands steady, with the kind of competence that didn't ask for permission to help. Nia didn't move immediately. You had a doctor here at midnight. I had my team alert her when I left. Because you knew you'd bring me back here. He met her eyes without flinching. Because I didn't know what condition you'd be in, and I wanted you to have care the moment you arrived, without waiting. That distinction mattered. She recognized it as mattering, and she followed Dr. Park down the corridor. The guest room was immaculate, in a way that felt intentional rather than sterile. Clothes had been laid out, sizes approximated closely, folded with a precision that bordered on ceremony. A phone, brand new, in a plain case. A charger. A handwritten card with the Wi-Fi password, and nothing else. No instructions, no expectations, no welcome that demanded a response. She sat on the edge of the bed while Dr. Park worked quietly around her, and she felt precisely, with a clarity she could have done without, like an artifact placed under glass for preservation. Not mistreated, not ignored, simply observed, kept, and she understood, in some cold and practical part of herself, that kept had always felt, to her, like the closest thing to safe. That thought unsettled her more than the cameras. Later, when the apartment had gone quiet and she should have been unconscious from sheer exhaustion, she found him in the kitchen. He was making tea, not the performative kind, the kind made for an audience, but the methodical kind, the same motion repeated until it became meditative. He didn't look up when she appeared. He set a second cup on the counter, with the quiet certainty of a man who had already heard her in the hallway. She wrapped both hands around the ceramic and said, without preamble, "You operate outside the law. Sometimes. That doesn't bother you." He considered this without rushing it. The law failed someone I couldn't protect. I decided to stop waiting for systems to catch up to what people do to each other when no one official is watching. R. She thought about the 9 times she'd picked up the phone and put it down again, about the restraining order her friend had told her would only make him angrier, about the gap, vast as an ocean, between what protection was supposed to be and what it actually delivered to people who needed it before the paperwork cleared. "Your mother," she said. She didn't know how she knew. She simply did. He was quiet for long enough that the city below filled the silence with its distant, indifferent light. "Yes," he said finally. "My mother." Neither of them moved to fill what came after that. The tea cooled in their hands. Outside, the city did what cities do, continued, indifferent, luminous. And inside that kitchen, 2 people who had both learned silence as a form of survival sat together in it and, for the first time in a long time, found it bearable. Neither of them slept that night. They arrived at 9 the next morning, and they arrived like a reckoning. Sarah, the attorney, was sharp-eyed and unhurried, the kind of woman who had heard every variation of this story and had transformed her reaction from outrage into precision, because precision was what actually helped. She set her laptop on the dining table without ceremony and spoke in the measured cadences of someone who deals in documented reality. Beside her, Dr. Okafor carried no laptop, only a yellow legal pad and a quality of attention that shifted the air in whatever room she occupied, making it feel both more honest and more bearable, not medical therapeutic. The kind of doctor who treated aftermath instead of wounds. "We're going to reconstruct the timeline," Sarah said. "Everything you remember, everything you deleted, because you thought it made you look crazy, Nia said. Sarah's expression didn't flinch. I was going to say complicated, but yes. What followed was 3 hours that felt like surgery performed without anesthesia. The texts Marcus had sent, recovered from cloud backups Nia hadn't known, still existed. The location history extracted from a battery optimization app he'd installed on her phone without her knowledge, 18 months of her movements, mapped and stored on a server with his login credentials. The financial records from the joint account, small withdrawals, irregular intervals, amounts carefully calibrated to read as incidental, laid end to end, the pattern was unmistakable. It was a leash. It had always been a leash. She had not been overreacting. This was the thing that kept stopping her, that she had spent 5 years being asked, in various tones ranging from concern to contempt, whether she might be overreacting. And now the evidence sat in front of her, like a verdict delivered to the wrong person, and she understood that she had been, in fact, building an inadvertent archive of her own abuse in real time. Every instinct overridden, every incident minimized, every time she'd talked herself out of certainty, leaving behind a timestamp that said, I was here. This happened. It was real. Dr. Okafor said nothing for a long time. Then, how does it feel to see it all in one place? Nia looked at the screen. She said quietly, like, I want to apologize to myself. That, said Dr. Okafor, is a good place to start. Across the city, quietly and without announcement, Minjun's people were already working. The network, Marcus, belonged to connections she hadn't known about, favors exchanged across years. The informal architecture of protection that kept men like Marcus functionally untouchable was being mapped with the patience and thoroughness of a demolition that intends to leave no load-bearing wall standing. By evening, 2 members of that network had received calls they hadn't anticipated. By midnight, Marcus's attorney had received documents he couldn't explain. By 2 a.m., a notification appeared on Minjun's phone, a location ping from a contact in Marcus's network. Her address, transmitted 12 minutes ago. Not her old unit, the new one. The building, the penthouse, the place Marcus had no business knowing existed, which meant someone had sold him a map to Minjun's front door. He read it once, set the phone face down on the desk, his jaw tightened by precisely 1 degree. He already knew what came next, and he was already prepared for it. Marcus moved in daylight, which was its own declaration. He appeared outside the building at noon, not alone, never alone, accompanied by a camera crew and a woman who introduced herself to accumulating bystanders as his publicist, and he spoke with the measured, grieving cadence of a man enormously burdened by his concern for someone he loved. She's not well, he said, turning slightly toward the cameras, a practiced motion. I've been trying to get her help for years, and now she's been taken in by someone who... Minjun stepped out of the building at 12:08 p.m. He hadn't hurried. He walked out, the same way he walked into every room, as though the space had been waiting for him to arrive and could now begin. He didn't speak first. He simply stood there, and the cameras, which had been fixed on Marcus and his careful grief, shifted involuntarily toward Minjun, pulled by something they couldn't name, some quality of presence that made the frame reorganize itself around him. Marcus tried once more. Who do you think? The warrants were signed this morning, Minjun said, in that same unhurried voice. Both of them, stalking and aggravated harassment. You may want to reconsider what you say next. Ah. He let that land, and then the door behind him opened. Nia had not planned to speak publicly. She had planned to let the legal machinery carry what needed to be carried, to remain behind the controlled glass of procedure and documentation. She had planned a great many things that fell away entirely the moment she heard Marcus use the word unstable in that precise, sorrowful register. The register he'd always used when he needed the people around her to stop trusting what she said. She walked out into the noon light and she said, "You tracked my phone for 18 months. I have every location ping you ever sent." The cameras didn't know where to point themselves. "You isolated me from my family, systematically. I have those texts, all of them." She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to shout. Her voice was the voice of someone who has finally stopped managing the comfort of people who never deserved that management. "And I have the live stream. 40,000 people watched what you did to my door that night. You can tell them I'm unstable, or you can explain the shadow. Building logs show your key fob pinged the service entrance at 11:52. Hallway cameras caught your jacket and your gait at 11:53. The live stream didn't need your face, Marcus. It only needed your timing." Officers arrived at 12:19 p.m., unhurried, carrying the particular composure of people who have everything they need and are simply completing what is already decided. The crowd watched in silence. Marcus was walked to a waiting vehicle. He didn't look back. Nia stood in the open air and felt the adrenaline evacuate her body all at once, sudden and total, like a tide withdrawing. Her knees failed her without warning, no drama, just the body finally releasing what it had been holding, and Minjun was simply there. One hand against her back, solid and immediate, catching her without spectacle, without comment, without turning it into anything other than what it was. One person steady enough to hold another who momentarily was not. She pressed her face to his shoulder for only a moment. He held her for exactly as long as she needed, and not 1 second longer than that. The parking garage on level B2 smelled of poured concrete and engine oil, and Nia was never supposed to be there. Minjun's rules were clear. No unscheduled trips, no blind corners, no underground levels, not until Marcus was fully contained. She'd left her phone in the car, a small, ordinary mistake, the kind that presents itself as nothing, as a minor inconvenience, the kind that doesn't announce itself as the beginning of anything. Minjun's man was 3 steps behind her, and they were almost to the elevator when the van doors opened simultaneously from both sides. What followed was not the choreographed clarity of action films. It was faster and uglier than that, hard sounds arriving before comprehension, movement before the mind understood there was something to move away from. The particular violence of things happening before the body has registered that they are happening at all. She was behind a concrete pillar before she was aware of having moved, pressed flat against it, and Minjun's voice cut through the chaos with clipped, unraised precision commands she couldn't fully parse, but that his team received and executed with the automaticity of people who have rehearsed for exactly this. She heard the shot. He didn't go down. He moved differently. One arm changed how it was held. Something altered in his silhouette, but he kept moving, kept directing, kept being the calm center around which everything else oriented itself. It was only after the garage went quiet, after 2 figures in zip ties sat against the far wall with the resigned posture of people who had gambled and lost, that he allowed his right hand to move toward his left shoulder. She crossed the space between them before she'd consciously decided to. "You're hit," she said, grazed. The same voice, the same measured, untroubled register. Minjun. His name came out differently than she'd intended, not carefully, not with the controlled remove she'd maintained for weeks. Raw and certain, and already past the point of pretending she was unaffected. Her hands found his face with the urgent, unplanned need of someone who has just watched a person she is not supposed to love almost become something she could not recover from. "You don't get to be calm right now. I need you to be something other than calm right now." Something in him shifted. Not much. Enough to matter. "Nia, don't manage me. Don't tell me you're fine, and then proceed to be fine in that way that makes me feel like I'm the only one in the room who's affected by things." He looked at her hands on his face. He looked at her, really looked, without any of the careful calibration he usually applied to looking at her. And something behind the composure became visible, not breaking through, but surfacing. Warmth that had been held at such careful distance for so long it had nearly convinced itself it didn't exist. His forehead moved toward hers. She felt his breath before anything else. Then his hand came up, not to pull her closer, to cover hers, gently, deliberately, holding them still against his face like he was keeping something precious from falling. "Not yet," he said quietly. The words were barely above silence. She understood what they meant. They meant, not because I don't want to, because you deserve to want this from somewhere other than fear and adrenaline and gratitude. They meant he had thought about this more carefully than she had realized, and that care was its own form of feeling. She stepped back. He let her. They rode upstairs without speaking, but the silence between them had changed its nature entirely, and they both knew it, and neither of them acknowledged it. Because acknowledging it would have required pretending they had more certainty than they did, and they were both, it turned out, people who preferred honesty to performance. The defense attorney's name was Carlyle, and he wore his affability like a weapon. He moved through his opening statements the way a practiced blade moves smoothly, with apparent reasonableness, the damage designed to manifest later, when the jury had already been softened. He spoke of motive in the warm, regretful tones of someone who wished the situation were otherwise, a woman who had lost her employment, who carried significant debt, who had found herself in the orbit of a man of considerable means, and had perhaps allowed that proximity to influence her account of events. He never said she was lying. He was far too skilled to say she was lying. He simply invited the jury to consider gently, with apparent reluctance, whether a woman in her circumstances might have reason to. He called the live stream a performance, a calculated origin story. He implied manufactured vulnerability designed to attract a powerful protector and turn crisis into currency. He called Min Jun Han a man of significant resources and demonstrable motivation to see this prosecution succeed, allowing the implication to settle like sediment that Nia was a story being told by someone else, a tool shaped to a purpose, a woman too thoroughly compromised by rescue to be trusted. Nia sat in the gallery and breathed slowly and did not allow her face to give Carlyle what he was working for. Then the evidence was entered. The live stream played first. The room went quiet in a way that courtrooms rarely do, genuinely, collectively quiet. The kind of silence that forms when everyone in a space simultaneously understands something that cannot be unmade. They watched her disappear from the frame. They watched the shadow expand under the door. They watched the screen cut to nothing, and then they sat with the nothing for the 3 seconds it lasted, which felt much longer. Then the security footage. The recovered messages read aloud in a clerk's flat voice, each one given equal weight, each one landing with the accumulated gravity of 5 years of documented harm. Then the location data, 18 months of her movements mapped against his known whereabouts, correlation after correlation that could not be explained by coincidence. Carlyle objected 4 times in 7 minutes. He was overruled 4 times. Nia took the stand, and she was neither destroyed nor performing invulnerability. She was present fully, uncomplicatedly present in the way that requires no performance, because it has already reckoned with the worst and decided to speak anyway. She said, "I didn't report it because I believed no one would take me seriously." She looked at the jury. "I nearly didn't take myself seriously." End quote. That is what 5 years of this does to a person. Public opinion, which had briefly fractured when Minjun's involvement was introduced as a narrative complication, shifted overnight, not loudly, decisively, the way a tide commits. The jury filed out at 4:47 p.m. Nia sat in the corridor outside and held the silence, the way you hold something that has the potential to either open or break, and you cannot yet tell which. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. She had anticipated something seismic relief arriving like a wave, or joy, or the particular release of a breath held so long the body has forgotten how to exhale without effort. She sat still in the courtroom, while the word was read 4 times, once for each count, and what arrived instead was quiet, not peace, not yet. The quiet of a room after a sustained noise has finally ended, defined by absence, shaped by what it is no longer being asked to contain. She had won. She reminded herself of this several times over the following days, the way you repeat something true that your body hasn't yet learned to believe. The civil case settled within 2 weeks. The number attached to the settlement was significant. She looked at it on the document Sarah slid across the table and felt nothing particular about the figure itself, only about what the figure represented, that the documented cost of 5 years of harm had been formally acknowledged by something larger than her own testimony. That it was now on record, undeniable, part of a world that had decided to believe her. That mattered. She kept choosing to let it matter. Minjon requested a meeting 3 days after the verdict. The study, the room she'd never been invited into, lined with files and one east-facing window, felt like neutral ground in a way the rest of the penthouse did not. He sat across from her at his desk and said, without preamble, "I want you to have the resources to rebuild independently of me. An apartment, I've arranged 3 options in your price range. Your choice. A legal fund for any subsequent proceedings. 3 employers who are expecting your call." She stared at him. "You're sending me away. I'm giving you an exit that belongs entirely to you." His voice was careful in the specific way. It was only careful when he was containing something he had decided not to say. "That's a distinction you're going to have to explain. You came here in crisis. I want you to leave with infrastructure, not reliance. I want to know, and I need you to know, that if you ever come back, it's because you chose to. Not because leaving felt impossible." He paused. 6 months. She held his gaze and understood, in the way you understand things that cost you something. He was protecting her from the trap of reconstruction, from building a new life inside borrowed walls and calling it freedom. He was protecting her from gratitude mistaken for love, and she recognized the logic, even admired it, even as some unguarded part of her wanted to tell him that she already knew the difference. She took the envelope. She left without looking back, not because she didn't want to, but because she had spent 5 years leaving herself for someone else, and she understood now, with the clarity of a woman who had finally been believed, that the next thing she built had to be hers first. 6 months is a particular kind of time, long enough to learn that silence can be chosen rather than imposed, long enough for the before version of yourself to become someone you remember with something closer to compassion than shame, long enough to understand the difference between a life arranged around someone else's requirements and a life arranged around your own, and to discover that the second kind, which sounds simple, requires an almost daily act of deliberate construction. Nia had a therapist she saw on Thursdays, in a small office that smelled like old books and fresh coffee, and she had stopped dreading those appointments sometime around week 6. She had a job she was not only good at, but knew she was good at, which turned out to be an entirely different experience than simply having employment. She had reclaimed friendships carefully, not all of them, and not quickly, with the attentive effort of someone rebuilding something that had been methodically dismantled and choosing, this time, to build it to last. She had her own name on her own lease, her own key. Her own apartment with colors she'd chosen because she liked them, art on the walls she'd selected because it said something she wanted said, a kitchen stocked according to her own appetite, a life arranged around its own center, radiating outward from herself rather than from someone else's needs or fears. She had not stopped thinking about him. She'd tried, in the early weeks, the way you try things you already suspect won't work but feel obligated to attempt. She'd told herself it was proximity and circumstance, adrenaline and dependency, all the reasonable clinical explanations for feeling anchored to someone who had been present during the worst and most important weeks of her life. By month 4, she'd stopped arguing with herself. Her therapist, with characteristic economy, had pointed out that refusing to acknowledge longing doesn't dissolve it, it simply relocates it, and the relocation is rarely an improvement. She drove to the building on a Tuesday in late autumn, when the city had gone the particular gold of a season beginning to release itself. She didn't call ahead. If he wasn't there, she'd leave. That was fine too. She had made a decision, not placed a bet. He was in the lobby, not positioned, not waiting in any arranged sense, simply present, speaking with someone from his team, jacket on, the ordinary posture of a man moving through his day. He looked up when she entered, and she watched the conversation he was having end without a word being exchanged about ending it, the other person reading something in his face and quietly removing themselves from the geometry of the moment. She crossed the lobby and stood in front of him and said what she had prepared to say, cleanly and without detour. I'm not here because I'm afraid. I'm not here because I owe you anything, or because leaving felt impossible, or because I haven't figured out how to be alone. She held his gaze. I figured out how to be alone. I'm good at it. I'm here because I want to be here. Because I want you, not what you represent, not the safety, not the rescue, you. That took me 6 months to be certain enough to say out loud. He was very still, the way he was still when he was feeling something significant and had not yet decided what to do with it. Then something in him, that composure, that precise and habitual containment, softened, not broke. Softened, the way a door opens that has been closed for a long winter, slowly, with the slight resistance of disuse, and then all the way. He offered her his hand, open, no conditions attached, no architecture of rescue or obligation or debt, just his hand, in the space between them. She took it. They walked out into the autumn afternoon, together, not toward anything resolved, not toward anything that promised ease, because they were both too honest for that kind of ending. They walked out into something unscripted and unmapped, freely chosen by two people who had each, separately, learned what it costs to let someone in and decided the cost was acceptable. More than acceptable. Worth it. Behind them, the building rose against the sky. The city carried on, being the city indifferent, luminous, enormous, with the lives of people navigating their own particular forms of damage and repair. Ahead of them, the rest of it waited, uncertain and alive, and entirely possible.